The World of RPGs, Episode 10, Hungary, Part 2 of 2. Welcome to The World of RPGs, a podcast in which we travel around the globe and learn about the local role-playing game scenes. I'm your host Mo Bartz, and in Episode 10 we are returning to Hungary. This is the second part of Episode 10, so go check out the first part before you get all confused. So after we got the overview, we now have a look at some specific projects. We begin with one of the many indie games written in Hungarian, though the setting is actually based somewhere else in Europe.
I am Gábor Seres. In my civil life, I mean when I'm not role-playing, I'm a biologist, I'm an ecologist, and I'm working at a Hungarian university as a researcher and a lecturer. And I'm doing research on urban ecology and how urbanization affects wildlife, especially city birds. So that's my research topic. And the love of nature that will be apparent in the game that I created, I think it comes from my job. But what drew me into RPGs? It's been a while. I'm 40 years old now, so I started doing this hobby when I was around 30 or so. So it is more than 25 years for now. And I was lucky because this big time span was without longer gaps. So this is a very persistent hobby for me, more than 25 years. And everything started with the books of Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. This choose your adventure kind of books. And I think this was fairly typical in Hungary in the 90s. So these books were very popular at the time. So the Citadel of Chaos or the Samutanti Hills or the Caverns of the Snow, these were memorable books and inspired us a lot. And in fact, later we tried to play these as adventures in an RPGs. And it was kind of silly, but these were the first steps. So I think that was the one that drew me into the RPGs. And the first actual tabletop game we were playing in the 90s was a Hungarian RPG. It's the Mágus. Probably you've heard about this. Maybe the other interviewers mentioned this. We've been playing Mágus for a decade or so when we were teenagers. It had a big effect on the Hungarian RPG community that time, and it still has some effect. But that was the first one, and it had a very big impact on me as well. And later came several other RPGs, especially when English was not a big problem anymore. So Call of Cthulhu, for example, or Ars Magica, Legend of the Five Rings, Warhammer. So just to name a few, we were running long campaigns in these, and later a bit of D&D, especially D&D 3.5. So in a nutshell, this is it.
And then you went on to write your own game. So can you say a bit about that one?
Yes, we can say so. So when I'm looking back, we can make this connection, but in reality, this wasn't that smooth. And of course, this did not start. Let's develop a new RPG, an own RPG. So this was way more organic and not as of trying to find a path. So this game, Heimurin, this is a game that is inspired by Nordic cultures, mythology, and Nordic heritage. And of course, the harsh, cold, and snowy northern landscapes. These were my primary inspirations. And it is very important that the world and the setting came first. So I had no idea to develop a rule system and to create a standalone game. Rather, when I was preparing for this interview a bit, I dug up old files and old emails. Actually, it started, I wrote a concise and short atmospheric paragraph, and I circulated this to my players, and I asked them if they wanted to play in this setting or in this world, and if they are interested. If you do not mind, I just roughly translated a small part of it, a few sentences, so I'm going to read it. It was something like, the frozen north at the end of the world, peat bogs, pale birch groves, snow-covered uplands, and ancient frost-bearded pine forests. The woods were not even the bravest there to venture. Long, freezing cold nights when people huddled by the fire and locked themselves in their small huts. Scattered small settlements and longhouses at the edge of the cruel wilderness. And of course, ice, snow, and fog. This is a world that is occupied by humans but is not dominated, where superstitions, traditions, and myth are woven into the people's everyday lives, and where honor and reputation are above all else. In this world, death reaps often and quickly, but fame earned is eternal. So it was something like this, maybe twice the length of this. And there was an illustration. I was looking for pictures that inspired me on DeviantArt. And I quickly found some of these. And actually, the painting I attached to this small atmospheric part. That was the painting that later I used as the cover art for the Hungary book. So this picture had a very big effect on me. I circulated this to my players, and this was in 2040, the autumn. And they said yes. So I started to write small adventures, and I was building the world and the setting from the bottom to the top, bit by bit. So you shouldn't think that I had an overarching idea of the world, because I did not have. Everything started in small local adventures. I didn't have, for example, a map of the world for long years, or I didn't have the history or the cosmology, or didn't have detailed background for the clans or the people whatsoever. So everything unfolded gradually, and I reacted to the interest of my players, and I just throw in these cool names, different parts of the world, and if they were interested, then the adventure lead there, and so we touched a lot of part of the world. So this was it. And when I was gathering my inspiration, quickly found this Nordic culture, of course, the Viking stuff. But I have to nail down that this is not 100% a Viking game. There are a lot of Viking games, because many of the cliches was kind of boring to me. So, for example, there are no ships or raiding on ships. This is an iconic. The game is more land-bound, so you can think of this as a mythic Scandinavia or Iceland, and there are no World Tree, for example. There are no Valkyries, Rainbow Bridge. This is also lacking. And some of the well-known gods are also missing or has some tweak that makes them more interesting for me. This is a mythical Scandinavian Iceland setting, and I was inspired a lot by ancient Icelandic sagas, stories from 1,000 years old. Luckily, they were translated to Hungarian. I think it's a very good translation, and it puts these stories into the historical context and explains a lot about the living of the people and the way how they lead their life, how they cope with the harsh environment. And this inspired me a lot. And I also built in pieces from Celtic mythology or the Laplandian folklore. So there are different cultures appearing in the game, but the focus is on the Norseman kind of culture. So these people are in the dominant human culture, and their characters are mostly from this culture. This is how it started. This is how it is. Regarding the setting, the rules, I can tell about that if you're interested.
Yes, but my first question would be, have you ever shown this setting to people from Scandinavia?
No, no, because it's all in Hungarian. And there are few people who can speak Hungarian from Scandinavia, I think, afraid. But that would be funny.
Yeah, so what kind of rule system do you use?
Hungarian has its own rule system, but it has a lot of familiar features from other well-known games. And this is also because this didn't start, as I mentioned, that's, okay, I will develop a new game. So rather, that was the setting, and we just wanted to play in this setting. So we turned on well-known rule system that we were using in those years. For example, we were playing in D&D and Kard és Mágia. Kard és Mágia, it's a Hungarian game. It has a small but strong community. It inspired me a lot. Maybe other people were talking about this. So we started with this system, but from the very early of this project, I had a strong vision about the setting. So first we used these rules, then I started to tweak these more and more, just to the rules to serve more the setting. So I discarded a lot of things from this D&D rule system that I did not need, and I created rules to things that I was missing from this genre. So the result resembles, I would say, to the scaffold of the D&D systems. For example, if you just look at how a player character is built up, it is similar. It has 6 attributes and modifiers that affects the secondary stats. It has skill points, background. You can choose some special features as you are leveling up. But there are also a lot of differences. For example, one thing that is different, that was the very first thing that I did, I replaced the 20-sided die with 2 dice 10-sided. So instead of rolling d20, you are rolling 2 dice of 10-sided. And the distribution of the expected values were quite different. And this affects a lot. So luckily I have a researcher background, so I turned to these problems from the point of view of the statistics, and I also did some math.
Yeah, I'm currently working on some programming for statistics.
Okay. You're a programmer. I'm an ecologist, so you're more in math than I am, but still, this is a bound between us, I guess. So the results, the outcomes are more predictable, and this is important. And there is another feature, I wanted to be the combat very dangerous and wounds are serious because northern sagas are full of bloodshed and, scratching each other in a long combat. It's not really that I wanted to see in the game. So during a fight, when you land a blow in Heimurin, it matters how successful your hit is. So every point that is above the enemy's defense is added to your actual damage. So this can result in massive damages and you do not need to wait for the critical hit to land these heavy blows. You can also have persisting scars. And I also created a simple rule for shield bashing because it's also an iconic thing in these northern fighting scenes. It's another feature that the defense is dynamic. So in combat, you also roll for your defense against each attack. So it's not static, and this adds a lot of excitement to the combat, especially because with the combination of a serious wound. So a combination of good attack roll and a bad defense roll can lead to a very serious damage without critical hit. But so this strengthens the dark feeling of the game and grim and gritty part. But there is also heroism in this game, and the characters have fate points, but enemies doesn't have fate points. From this pool, they can reroll any rolls, and once in their lifetime, they can avoid certain death, for example. And this symbolizes that the gods believe in you as a person and that you are destined to accomplish these heroic deeds. You can defy death until your fate points are running out. You can replenish this mostly with role-playing. If you revere the gods, make sacrifices, or achieve important things that for your character, then you can get these points back. So it's not automatic. Also, I wanted to support the setting with the fame systems. So player characters accumulate these fame points with their acts. If they're covered or if they're brave, then they accumulate these points, and it is a scale from 0 to 100. And for every earned fame point or fame points, there is a small tag on your character sheet. For example, you were thrown out from the feast hall because of drunken brawling and insulting people, you just receive some negative fame points, or you are a winner of a tough duel, or you were the last man standing in this and that battle, then you earn fame points. In any encounter with an NPC, the DM rolls for this fame point, and the result will affect the NPC's behavior if you like you or not, or if the Jarl or a prominent person wants to speak with you or not at all. So maybe you cannot go through the door or the guardsman because you have bad reputation due to this role. And you could use this in social encounters. It can add bonuses to your roles, stuff like this. But I think it's more like a role-playing part, but it's an important aspect of the game because illiteracy is high in this setting, and everybody wants their name to be remembered, carved on runestones or cards to sing songs about them. So how this is translated to the level of the rules with this fame system. Regarding the wounds, I mentioned that those are serious, and this is accompanied by the recovery is long. So the healing magic is sporadic and not potent, and always requires the presence of fire because this is a cold world. So I would say that two-field healing is not really an option in Heimurin. So recovery is way longer. But for example, you can gain temporary hit points or some strength if you are drinking mead, because it's always an iconic part of these northern stories. These are the cornerstones.
Is this fully finished and available in Hungary, or are you still working on it?
Both, if I can say that, because I was published this in 2021, December. I created a homepage for this RPG, heimurin.hu, and I put everything to this homepage, so everything can be downloaded freely. And luckily, I have a friend who is a graphic designer, and he created a badass design for this game and made the text appear properly and everything like that. So I uploaded the rulebook, the book of word, some adventure modules, and stuff like these maps and everything. And I just showed it to the community. And I was curious if they interested at all. So what kind of criticism I will receive. Because we've been playtesting this system and this word for more than 1,000 testing hours. I was running a campaign and I was also a player on this word for years, or 130 or 40 game sessions or so. And after that, I created these downloadable files, and it was very long. It was more than a year just to assemble everything and reread and polish the text. So I was curious if people would be interested. And luckily, I received positive feedbacks and criticism that I could use for. So what I'm doing right now, I'm working on the second version of Hungarian. And it's very exciting because I found a Hungarian book publisher, Tuon, and to my big surprise, they were interested in this fan-made game. So we had a lot of negotiations, and they nodded to that they would provide me a professional background, and they would distribute these books, they would print it. So what I'm doing right now, I'm preparing the second version of this game, and I'm trying to build in all the criticism and the suggestions that I received from the community, because the book was lacking some parts. So now the second version will be a more complete one, including Book of Monsters. I will expand the rules for this fame system to integrate more into the game. I will polish a lot of stuff and expand the existing chapters. So there is a lot of things to do. Since the appearance of the game, and the last 1.5 years, I'm spending virtually all my spare time to develop the game and to write. And now the plan is that it will go into print within a few months. So I don't want to talk about deadlines because I'm not sure when it will appear physically, but soon. So I have a contract with the book publisher now. And because this is a one-man project, this is slow because I'm contacting the graphic guys and now the professional graphics are being drawn for the game, and I'm doing all this contacting, the writing, the creative stuff. So it takes a lot of time. But now I see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Have you had enough on OSR last episode? No? Okay, let's get into more detail.
My name's Sándor Gebei. I'm also known on the internet as Ines Midgard. I'm the co-author of a Hungarian retro clone of Basic Expert called Kazamatek és Kompániák, roughly translated as Dungeons and Companies. I also semi-regularly blog about role-playing games and lately about solitaire, RPG-adjacent games and board games. And I'm a professional copy editor. I freelance with RPG publishers and writers like Onyx Path Publishing and Hack and Slash Publishing. I started, it was quite some time ago. I think it was roughly 20 years ago that I started gaming with, I think it was Shadowrun 3rd edition, the Hungarian translation, obviously. And since then I played many, many games, lately mostly of the OSR types. But I also had a fondness really for World of Darkness games. And lately it's mostly about simulationist tactical games. For some reason, they piqued my interest.
Okay, that sounds almost similar to my own biography, because Shadowrun was my second game, but that was in 1995 when I got it, so a bit earlier. So let's start with your blog. Can you say a bit about what its name is and what it's about?
Yes, the address is inesmidgard.blogspot.com. I think it's been going on for 8 years, I want to say. I've been doing it really on and off. Well, I started in 2013, so it's actually 10 years now. It started as a blog about old school D&D stuff, really, and later transitioned into a review blog. I posted quite a lot of reviews, mostly of OSR games, sometimes of adventure modules. Well, nowadays, really just any type of game that I like.
And do you cover English language games or Hungarian games or both?
Yeah, the blog is completely in English. I don't think it deals with Hungarian publications. I sometimes post rough translations of bits from Kazamatek és Kompániák, but that's about it, I think. Although I do cover sometimes things written by other Hungarian authors that appear in English.
If you put in snippets of the Hungarian games, but these are not available in English, why do you write about them in English for an audience who couldn't read them in the original?
When I write about Hungarian games, most of that is a rough translation of the gist of a particular rule or aspect of a Hungarian game. For instance, I posted an abbreviated description of spells from Kazamatek és Kompániák onto my blog, and the bare bones class descriptions, that sort of thing. Because even though people might not be able to read the whole thing, I think I can still share the most interesting things about it that they can still put in their games. It might not work with all sorts of games, obviously, but for OSR games, which are fairly cross-compatible, I still think that's a viable strategy. And it's a lot less work than translating the game wholesale.
You said you're a copy editor for a couple of games. So does that mean for the English editions or for Hungarian translations? And for which specific games was this?
I copy edit in English. Kazamatek és Kompaniák was the only Hungarian language book that I worked on. But as a copy editor, I worked on publications like Against the Dark Master, Courtney Campbell's latest 3 Kickstarted publications, like Artificious Deceptions and Dilemmas, on Downtime and Domains. I work a lot with Onyx Path Publishing. I worked on a couple of Trinity Continuum books that are being released. I worked on Dark Streets and Darker Secrets by Diogo Nogueira. I think that's probably butchering the pronunciation. And a couple of other things that haven't been published yet.
Okay, I have the first edition Aeon Trend. No, I used to have them. I think I sold them before my last move. Okay, so let's go back to that Hungarian game, which I don't want to try to pronounce. What did you do on it?
I was a co-author of the second edition of it. So the first edition of Kazamatek és Kompaniák was released in 2012, and it was written by a guy named Áron András Salamon, and then edited by a great friend of mine, István Boldog Bernard. It was a freebie PDF only thing, and he decided that he wanted to make a revised edition of it because the text was not that great, really. It did the job, excited people, but that was about it. And he contacted me, and we worked on it together for quite a lot of years. Eventually, it was published, I think 3 years ago, by Gábor Lux. It's available now, well, sadly only in Hungarian. It's a big box of 2 volumes, and maybe I think it comes with an adventure module as well, and a map. It's kind of a retro clone of Basic Expert D&D, although it has its own spin on it. It's limited to 6 levels, and it takes a lot of inspiration from the original Dungeons & Dragons with regards to a lot of its procedures, particularly the hiring henchmen and their morale going up and down during an adventure.
So would you say there's anything specifically Hungarian in the game, or is it universal and just in the Hungarian language?
The game itself is pretty universal, but the other author, István, has a great setting for it called Erdőelve. Bits of it are included in the box set, and it takes great inspiration from Transylvanian myths and folklore, classic Hungarian literature of the more fantastical kind, and that sort of thing. So I think that is very Hungarian, but the game itself is pretty universal.
Could you maybe give an example of these myths or what the Transylvanian setting is like? I mean, I've visited Transylvania, but only for 1 day, so I don't really know it that well.
So a lot of the Hungarian flavor actually comes from the naming of things. Even for a Hungarian gamer, these are very uniquely local. I do not attempt to translate them into English.
Do you mean like the location names or the NPCs or monsters?
Well, all really, actually. István's he works with classical Hungarian literature. He's a fountain of knowledge in that regard. He worked it expertly into his setting.
If you say classical Hungarian literature, from when is that? And could you maybe say some authors? Because I've never read any Hungarian literature at all.
Yeah, that's 19th century Hungarian literature. So things like János Arany, Mór Jókai, and a bunch of lesser-known writers whose work is probably not available in English. But I think János Arany and Mór Jókai have been translated.
So I got the feeling that OSR games are quite popular in Hungary. Is that true, or is it just because I happen to talk to people who are fans?
The latter. Emphatically the latter. We are a very close-knit community, the OSR community in Hungary. But I don't think it's by far the most popular thing. but we are very vocal and online as well.
So which are the most popular mainstream games?
Now I think it's Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I can't tell you what the second most popular game is. Before 5th edition, for a long time, it was actually a Hungarian game that was the most popular one, called Mágus, which was the second Hungarian language game that appeared, that was published here. It's also very much like D&D, but with particular 90s feel to it. I don't think the Hungarian scene is much different from the other local scenes in Europe, but I probably should listen to all your previous interviews to make sure that I'm correct. I think the unique aspects mostly come from particular campaigns run by particular people who make an effort to bring that unique vision into their games. Plus, a lot of that is just the minor differences between nationalities in Europe. Just as beer is different everywhere, but, it's still beer. I think it's the same with RPGs, at least fantasy RPGs.
Finally, I was pointed to someone who does what I haven't dared to do, research role-playing games. This interview was probably the longest one I've had so far, but I removed my own rants about theory or cross-references I did to other episodes so that you can just enjoy my interviewee.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Mátyás Hartyándi. I'm a Hungarian role player, young academic, and a trainer and business consultant in organization development. I started playing tabletop role games when I was 12, and it was a coincidence. Of course, fighting fantasy books, so it started like that. And at the back of one of these books, I have seen some kind of advertisement, and I went into the shop with my mother. And fortunately, the guy there sold the first role playing game to my mother. So it was the most famous Hungarian role playing game called Mágus. And somehow this guy could convince my mom that buying this, huge rule book is the best gift to her son. So that was the way I got into. I received this book as a gift from my mother. I started to read it and I realized after 10 pages that it's not the same game. So it's not turning pages and playing some game. It's about imagination and playing together with others. And I got immersed immediately. I'm the type of guy who doesn't stick to one game, but always trying out new ones, pushing the boundaries of what could a tabletop role-playing game be.
And you also wrote a couple.
I think my contribution is more about translating and introducing new ideas in Hungary than creating new ones.
So which ones did you translate?
I translated a few indie games. These were games where I have felt that they would fill a gap. Hungary has its own history and culture about role-playing games. It's quite classic or traditional in a sense that some of the most famous games like Shadowrun, Cyberpunk, D&D, and Call of Cthulhu got translated into Hungarian in the 90s. But some of the new stuff, especially the indie stuff, that's niche, that's trying to push the boundaries of tabletop role-playing games we were missing. I have translated some of the free ones. For example, one of my favorite authors is John Harper, and I translated Lady Blackbird and Lasers and Feelings and other small indie games and story games into Hungarian. There are other games which could not be translated because, they are a for-profit game. So for these, we often created some kind of cheat sheet or some tool in Hungarian which GMs and game referees who already on the game can use during gaming. For example, for Microscope, for Fiasco, for a lot of more famous indie or story games. And the other branch I have translated into Hungarian is from the Nordic LARP scene or the North European role-playing scene. I'm quite interested in different traditions or lineage. Maybe you have heard of Jeep form. or the Danish festival scenario tradition, or the Nordic LARP scene. So these are all connected things. I have translated a few favorites of mine. These games are more heavy on theme. For example, some of them are about loss, about having a sick member in the family, or about political stuff. Yeah, these are the two main branch I have translated in Hungarian.
I played Lasers and Feelings recently at an online convention in Ukraine. I mean, it was a Ukrainian game master sitting in Kiev running the game online for people all over the world. And he had a modified version of Lasers and Feelings where he changed something.
Also, one more thing I want to mention. Right now, we have a couple of Powered by the Apocalypse game translated and published into Hungarian. In the early phase, I guess until 2017, I think I was one of the people in Hungary who tried to popularize this engine or framework. Yeah, maybe that's another contribution.
Something I noticed is that everyone I've interviewed was more involved with either indie games or OSR. So I haven't really interviewed any Magush fans. Are they like a separate community, would you say?
So Hakush community seems like a totally separate community. The stereotype says that they're a very insular group, only caring about their game. But in reality, when you meet these guys, the situation is very different. For example, I was fortunate enough to play Lovecraft-esque. So Lovecraft-esque is about recreating the stories of Lovecraft without any traditional role-playing game baggage. So, no health point, no rolling with dice, nothing like that. But it's still a role-playing game. And one of the core organizers at the Hungarian Magus scene ran this game. So I would say that contrary to the stereotype that they only care about their game, I think some of the Magus organizers are quite open-minded and well-versed in role-playing games. And it's very interesting because right now, Magus is also, you can call it an indie game because there is no official edition in the last 15 years or maybe more. So the whole game runs on fans, non-profit fans who do it for love. And basically there are 3 or maybe more communities in Hungary. One of them is called Kronikák, Chronicles. It's a network of smaller clubs and organizations who are working together. And the second biggest one is Kalandozók, adventurers. These are the 2 biggest groups of Magus fans I'm aware of.
I also heard you employ role playing games at work or in research. Can you say something about that?
Yes. So after I finished my university and received a degree, I moved back to my hometown and started working at a school as a teacher. My mother is a teacher, so it's a great influence on me. And initially, I did not want to mix my hobby with my profession, but soon I realized that kids got excited by playing and by fun, playful activities. So I started to introduce various aspects of gaming and role playing into my teaching practice. I think some are quite familiar with the term gamification, but my scope or the way I look at it, it's way more broad than that. For example, I got into actually using tabletop role-playing games for education or to sensitize about a topic, for example, deep poverty. But I also got into, for example, theater in education, drama in education. So different well-established movements that are doing something similar to role-playing, but already have a deep knowledge base, best practice, and know-how about how to do it. And I had further studies in game-based education and stuff like that. I'm actually conducting a PhD on how we can use and apply games and playful methods at leadership development. So I'm still doing that. But right now, as a trainer and a consultant, it's actually part of my, everyday toolkit. Situational exercises, smaller simulations, and stuff like that. When I started around 2014 and 15, we were more, so to speak, experimental. For example, we did a game called Settlers of Mars. It was a sci-fi game, but under the surface of being a sci-fi settler game, it was about deep poverty. It was a simulation of how we can survive if we live in really deep poverty. So it was half a simulation, half a role-playing game. It was quite successful in Hungary. Still, it got very interesting results in terms of how did we influence the participants? Was it beneficial or actually the opposite? And later, one of my more well-known design stems from a Danish competition. There is a famous Danish competition called the Festival Otto Award or Scenario competition. And there I submitted a game about the rock band Doors. It was based on the life of Jim Morrison, the singer. And it was a very interesting game for some players, but I received the feedback that this game is not really about Jim Morrison and the Doors and the 60s. It's more about life choices and existential crisis. So I started to work on the game, changing some of the mechanics. And right now we are using it as a development game in a for-profit context. For example, we have used it at universities, training engineers who will be leaders at multinationals, how to lead. And we used it at various companies to train future leaders.
Okay, that sounds cool because I myself occasionally do intercultural trainings as a side thing. And of course, there you have role plays in there, but they're not necessarily role-playing games. There's one famous training which has a game element, but only one side has it because they're capitalists and the others are like community-based and they don't even know the game rules and don't have to play it because it's supposed to teach you that different societies have different systems, but there are rules in the game.
Yeah, but they are not mechanics from board games or from role-playing games. Yeah, I totally see what you mean, and I completely agree. So actually, role-playing as a general method, it's quite common in learning and development and training. But role-playing games are very specific things, and I think most of the people in the role-playing game scene don't necessarily understand the distinction between just role-playing and having role-playing experience with strong mechanics and stuff like that. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
And you said you submitted that to a Danish competition. So I'm assuming it was written in English.
Yes, it's in English and you can find it online. It's called Memento Horizon. It's a bad pun on the phrase Memento Mori and the name of Jim Morrison. I have a few things to mention you if you're interested. So, how does it started with me? I think my early contribution to Hungary and indie role-playing game scene is mostly communities and events. In 2008, I was living in China and I was trying to keep in touch with my Hungarian friends about old school D&D and role-playing. And we had a lot of discussion on the forums and, in email. But I had this feeling that these people should meet in person because up to that date, there was no clear opportunity to meet together. Right now, I'm talking about old school D&D. And when I moved back to Hungary, I just decided that if no one else will do it, I have to do it. My father is a community organizer, so I have some influence from him. And I started organizing an event called Véletlen Találkozások. It means random encounters in English. And it was the first OSR event in Hungary. Basically, the first idea was that, some people are running old school D&D, they claim that they have mega dungeons and stuff like that. Back in 2009, mega dungeon was a big thing. So I talked with a few of them. And after we had around 8 or 9 GMs, we invited everyone on the forums to come to this meeting so they could try out each other game and each other style. What do we mean by old school role playing? What do we mean by running a mega dungeon? What do we mean when we are running dungeons but not in the modern dungeon crawl sense? So what was the original idea behind D&D and stuff like that? And it was very influential, and it was a very bottom-up grassroots event. For example, there was no entrance fee. The GMs were coming for free, and all the others had two options. One is to bring some game or book that you don't need anymore and exchange, exchange stuff. And the second one is for paying for everyone else lunch. So hoping for the community lunch. Things were like this back then. It was not a for-profit thing. Also, it was maybe the first or definitely one of the first events when it was not a tournament-style gaming convention, when groups play the same adventure, the same module, the same scenario, but it was more like showcasing what the Hungarian scene actually does. And after I stopped it, I tend to stop things at the peak of it. Some of my friends took over and they started to organize something very similar, and it's called Kalandorok Társasága, Society of Adventurers, and it's still going on. But right now, in 2023, we have more events like this. For example, I just have to mention Árnyék Szféra, Sphere of Shadows, which has a long-standing events of these game-on-demand style events, which are awesome. So this was one of my first early contribution to the indie scene in Hungary. My second contribution was organizing the first online playing community. Back then, in around 2010 or 11, people could play online through Skype, but video meeting was for money. And Google that time introduced, was it Google Plus or Google Meet or something? So it was a new thing because it was for free. And it started to evolutionize how we can play analog games online, virtually. So early on, we gathered ourselves and organized an online community on Google Plus called LFX. It stands for looking for X, and X means here experience or the treasure that we are all looking after. And we mostly played niche games that you could not find players in person. So, for example, we had very niche games that had players from Japan, Germany, Hungary at the same time. And 10 years ago, it was something. Of course, under the coronavirus, everyone experienced this playing online. So right now, it's totally the standard. But back then, it was a big hype. And we just surfed on the wave of this hype, So we were the first of doing it in a big community in Hungary. And we also stopped it at the peak of it, but still a lot of people play online in Hungary. One more thing about the academic part and the research. So I was quite interested in researching role-playing games, and I was the first Hungarian person who published an academic journal publication about role-playing games and their application. Here I mean tabletop and live-action role-playing, not computer and stuff like that. But I hit a glass ceiling and I tried to publish more. Most of the editors responded that I need at least a PhD process to publish. So I had to find a university which could accept my topic. So I searched a lot, and actually it was quite interesting that well-known Hungarian university specializing in economics and management called the Corvinus University of Budapest was quite open for my ideas. All of my cold calls got accepted. All the professors responded positively that, yeah, my topic is very interesting. So right now I'm researching applying role-playing, not just role-playing games, but all types of role-playing into leadership development and human resource development. And what's interesting about it is, I think that most of the people who play role-playing games are not familiar with similar movements that are very close to role-playing games. I would like to mention a few things, so it might be interesting. First, one of the main branch I'm interested in comes from business simulations and serious games. It's a very popular topic in Japan and the US, but especially at the Netherlands. I think some of the listeners are familiar with the name of Johan Huizinga, the most famous scholar on games. He was Dutch, so of course at the Netherlands it's a very mainstream topic, using games for serious application. And just because they are not focusing on the role-playing aspect, the aspect that I'm taking a role different than myself, it's very similar. There are a lot of simulations that could be called tabletop role-playing game or a live-action role-playing game, or even computer-based role-playing game. The second thing I want to mention is a branch of movements that comes from Britain. It's basically applied theater and applied dramatics. And some of these movements has versions which has very heavy mechanics procedures, very similar to what we call mechanics in tabletop role-playing games. So in my research, I try to bring them together because these fields are mostly cultivated and researched in silos. So mixing them, it's a quite interesting topic, at least for me.
So thank you for listening to the World of RPGs. A special thanks goes out to the Hungarian role players who talked to me, Wendy, the two Gabors, Gergely, Sandor and Matyas. I also want to thank Gabor Lux and Istvan Belansky for helping me reach out to people. The intro music was by Thomas Mutziu. As for recommendations, I recently came across Dice Exploder, which is a fun podcast about specific RPG rules. So if anyone here is into designing or writing games, that podcast is really helpful. As always, you can find links to the creators and games mentioned in the episode in the show notes, and please subscribe and review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you want to. Anyone still using Yelp? I don't know if you can rate a podcast there. Now we finished the little Central and Eastern European block, sorry for that pun, and we'll leave that continent for now for a different region and very different time zones. The next episode was the hardest to research so far, and it took me over a year to get in contact with local players. But once I found a way, this became one of the most exciting episodes to date. Now for the teaser that you're going to hear, that's a session of Dungeons and Dragons, and I didn't understand a word of what they were saying, but I can tell you what the party looked like, because the female player wears a wizard's hat, the guy in the tracksuit wears a tinfoil helmet, and another guy has a ukulele on his lap, which he plays occasionally. It's a riot. And this is what it sounds like.
法师由于之前诗人站在了法师的面前，还是比较感动的，决定拯救一下诗人。
打算怎么救他呢？
想想，
还得是法师后。如果你打出足够的伤害的话，你倒是的确可以让这个虫子把你推入深处。就靠你了呀，法师大小姐。
那这样吧，我施展一个暗示术，暗示这个蠕虫今天可能吃了点不太正常的东西，对，肠道蠕动的比较剧烈，然后，或许他今天有点窜稀，把食物从粉色的肉团里拉出来。
你是说你要让那个蠕虫把诗人从屁眼里拉出来？
好的。非常文雅的描述，
还是不要拉。我觉得
实际上我不太确定这个蠕虫有没有皮儿，或者说它能不能拉。这样吧，是你自己投个投子决定一下吧。你投一个第6好，如果投出来是1，你就从嘴里出来；如果投出来是2到6，你就从屁眼里。我会投个第6，
投2到6吗？那他这个不能是什么泄殖膨风体吗？
真不错，是的，我帮他过一个暗示的豁免。你的 DC 如果没记错的话，应该是14对吧？
我不知道为什么现在特别想他后面过，后面
是4，失败。你要出来了，你应该开心一点。
确实，
这个场面其实有点难以描述，但是随着那个子虫的肚子跟肠道一阵不自然的蠕 浮动，使你感觉到自己好像被往下动了一点，然后又往下动了一点，直到好像到达某一个临界点，